Okay, we will start. So, happy International Day of Older Persons. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone from United Nations in New York, and welcome to our event on digital equity for all ages. We would like to thank our partners, speakers, and the audience who are joining us today. Before we get started, I would like to go over a few practical items. The event will be recorded and live streamed on our UN Web TV channel. The link is available on the chat. Sign language interpretation and closed captions will be provided during this event. To select closed captions, please click on the CC icon. It's at the bottom of the Zoom screen, and you select Show Subtitle. Then you can choose how you want to view the transcript. We will also have a live interpretation in English, French, and Spanish. Please click the interpretation icon below also in your Zoom screen and click on the language that you would like to hear. To only hear the interpreted language, click Mute Original Audio. Participants also will have the opportunity to ask questions to the panelists through the Q&A function. Please use the chat box just for sharing resources on the topic of the event. And as per the United Nations protocol, please avoid using the chat for personal comments and sending messages to panelists and attendees. It is now my greatest honor to give the floor to Ms. Cynthia Stewart. She's the chair of the NGO Committee on Aging in New York. Ms. Stewart, the floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Welcome to the 31st observance of the United Nations International Day of Older Persons. My name is Cynthia Stewart, and I am chair of the NGO Committee on Aging in New York. The mission of the NGO Committee on Aging is to raise awareness of the opportunities and challenges of an aging society. We advocate within the UN community to further integrate aging into UN policies, programs, and we encourage member states to include aging needs in social and economic policies. We are strong advocates for human rights of older persons. We also work with global alliances to help carry out our work, such as the Global Alliance on the Rights of Older People and their current campaign to Age with Rights. Our theme today, Digital Equity for All Ages, is about rights. I think the aging of the global population will be a defining demographic trend of the 21st century. Yet, our societies struggle to see the opportunities that this trend can mean. The importance of the role of technology in achieving healthier aging, how technology helps us to build smarter cities, combats ageism, age discrimination, how it ensures financial inclusion of older persons, how it raises awareness of aging and intergenerational issues, and it can support millions of caregivers across the world. So many opportunities, but only if there is digital literacy and equity available. Last year's theme of this observance was the World Health Organization's Decade of Healthy Aging, which documented that healthy aging requires a lifespan approach to create a healthy society for all ages. This current pandemic has taught us a lot, not only about the need for the protection of human rights for older persons and other marginalized populations, but also how we need to transform society. The digital world is a very important component of that transformation. So in a moment, we will start today's incredible program on digital equity for all ages. But first, we are very grateful for the ongoing support of the group of friends of older persons here at the United Nations, and you'll be hearing from 2 of their 25 member states today on the program. We're indebted to our colleagues in UNDESA and to the Office of the Secretary General's Envoy on Technology and all the planning and communications committees that make today possible. This observance, with its fabulous interpreters and tech team, is only possible with the very generous support of our sponsors. Thank you, AARP and M&T Bank. Our brilliant co-chairs for this year's observance are Erica Dar, the Director of Global Alliances and Advocacy for AARP International. Her co-chair is Magda Kaczmarska, who is UN representative of Generations United and a global fellow for the Equity in Brain Health with the Atlantic Institute. It's my pleasure to turn the program over to you with gratitude. Thank you, Erica and Magda.
Thank you, Cynthia. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, we are delighted to have you join us today from all over the world to celebrate the UN International Day of Older Persons. In 2050, 1.5 billion people will be turning 65 or older. And the COVID-19 pandemic has affected each and every one of us in how we function in our daily lives. We are in a world that has increased our reliance on technology, amplifying inequities prevalent before the pandemic. In his roadmap for digital cooperation, the Secretary General highlights the shift to digital at a rapid pace. While noting the benefits, he also cautions us to face the myriad of challenges such as the growing digital divide, cyber threats, and human rights violations. With half of the world's population currently offline, the Secretary General calls upon all stakeholders to play a role in advancing a safer, more equitable digital world, one which will lead to a brighter and more prosperous future for all. Our conversations today offer an opportunity to pick up the mantle for digital equity for all ages. I now would like to welcome my co-chair, Magda Kaczmarska, to please take the floor. Magda, I cannot thank you enough. Talk about intergenerational collaboration. It was such an honor to work on this program with you. So over to you, Magda.
Thank you, Erica, and thank you all for joining us today. I'm commemorating this day. Our theme for this year's International Day of Older Persons is digital equity for all ages. This predicates the understanding that prioritizing support of older persons has intergenerational significance. What we design today has implications for future generations. In our discussion today, we shine a light on the inequities that exist within our global communities. The second part of our program will highlight access to digital technology as a human right. Addressing the inequities that exist within lower middle income countries will be forefront. However, we must be mindful that even within countries with higher socioeconomic medians, this inequity is stark and apparent. Communities of color, immigrants, people with disabilities, members of the LGBTQI community, and people living in rural communities all face cumulative barriers to equitable access to technology. As illuminated by the Secretary General in his roadmap for digital cooperation, universal access to digital technology is paramount for active and equitable participation in every sector. Erica, I pass the floor back to you to introduce the rest of our program.
Thank you, Magda. It is now my great honor to invite the Assistant Secretary General from the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs, UNDESA, to provide the UN Secretary General's statement to celebrate the 31st International Day of Older Persons, and then to also provide the keynote address in her role, which we're very excited about, as Chief Officer of the UN Secretary General Special Envoy on Technology's Office. SDGs Pataliciano, you now have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Excellencies, distinguished participants, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, let me begin indeed by reading a special message from the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, who sends his regrets that he is unable to join us here today. So the Secretary General message says, staying connected with loved ones, attending a religious service, taking a stance, all of these activities and actions and many more are increasingly carried out online, especially as individuals and communities grapple with the restrictions imposed in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. As we face the challenge of navigating our world's growing reliance on technology, perhaps no population could benefit more from support than older persons. Digital equity for all ages, the theme of this year's International Day of Older Persons, offers an important chance to expand opportunities across generations for the benefit of society as a whole. Older persons have often been left more isolated during the pandemic. They are also at greater risk of suffering from the rising threat of cybercrime, while taking all possible measures to hold to account those unscrupulous criminals preying on older persons. We must also work to strengthen the digital skills of the older persons as an important defense and means to improve their own well-being. Older persons are far more than a vulnerable group. They are a source of knowledge, experience, and rich contributions to our collective progress. When older persons can access, learn, and use new technology, they will be better equipped to contribute to reaching the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. Our universal call to action to end poverty, protect the planet, and ensure that by 2030, all people enjoy health, peace, and prosperity. On this year's International Day of Older Persons, I call for more inclusive policies, strategies, and actions to achieve digital equality for people of all ages. Thank you, Mr. Secretary General. This was his message. And now, ladies and gentlemen, the Secretary General's message is loud and clear. It is critical that we address the issue of ensuring digital inclusion for all, particularly for older persons. Allow me to add, therefore, a few more points to his important words. I speak, as you heard, wearing two hats. Firstly, in my role as Assistant Secretary General of the Department of Economic and Social Affairs, where I oversee social development issues, including our department's work on aging. And secondly, as the officer in charge of the Office of the Secretary General's Envoy on Technology. And in both roles, I am convinced of the critical need to prioritize the dimension of digital for older persons. We have all seen how, during the COVID-19 pandemic, digitalization has accelerated all over the world. Education, work, information, and so many other basic aspects of life have been transferred online and are taking place virtually, just like this meeting. Amidst all of this, we have also seen how many older persons are being left behind by digitalization. More than any other group in society, older persons suffer from digital inequity, either lacking access to technologies or not benefiting fully from the opportunities provided by technological progress. Many of you present here today may have also attended the last week event on these issues organized by DEVEX and AARP. There, I and other speakers all agreed on the urgent need to act, including, for instance, promoting lifelong learning for digital skills, as well as individual optimization through elderly-friendly design. Without these, older people risk being left out of essential services provided online, such as telehealth and telemedicine. And they face shortened working lives and are also more vulnerable to online harms. Indeed, as the international community faces new risks and opportunities in this increasingly digitalized era, the United Nations has risen to the challenge, and it has put forward a bold vision of the digital future the world needs. In the Secretary General's roadmap for digital cooperation last year, and now reinforced in his common agenda, just released a few weeks ago. And in our efforts to forge a more open, free, and secure digital future for all, the United Nations is committed to ensuring that this is inclusive of everyone, including older persons. This is why, for instance, in 2020, the World Summit on the Information Society Forum, for the first time, has dedicated a special track to older persons and ICT. In collaboration with relevant stakeholders, DESA has partnered with the ITU and WHO on its first ever Healthy Aging Innovation Prize, which was awarded to the most innovative technology enabling healthier and more active aging. I also look forward to the continuing collaboration between AARP and the Office of the Secretary General's Envoy on Technology to implement the Secretary General's roadmap for digital cooperation. In particular, the Tech Envoy's office is working with stakeholders to ensure that our definitions and framework of digital inclusion, a concept that is broadly accepted but has yet to be universally defined, includes the aspect of older persons. Finally, the proclamation of the United Nations Decade of Healthy Aging 2021-2030 presents an opportunity for collective action with diverse stakeholders to enable older persons to do what they value, that is, retaining the ability to make decisions and preserve their purpose, identity, and independence. Just last month, in September, the United Nations launched a new multilingual knowledge exchange platform for this decade. This provides a central place to find, share, and produce knowledge and support networking on healthy aging, which also includes digital inclusion of other persons. And I encourage you all to use it. If we are to achieve, as the theme of this International Day suggests, digital equity for all ages, we will need a broad, multi-stakeholder coalition of actors, member states, the private sector, the civil society, acting together in concert. I am pleased that today's commemoration of the International Day is indeed such a multi-stakeholders gathering, and I look forward to your important discussions. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Assistant Secretary General, for delivering the statement from the Secretary General and for your keynote address. I ask you now, in joining me in viewing the video address by His Excellency Juan Ramon de la Fuente, Ambassador to the Permanent Mission of Mexico to the United Nations. Mexico, along with Canada, are the co-chairs of the Secretary General's high-level panel on digital cooperation.
Hello, Excellencies, dear friends. I would like to thank the NGO Committee on Aging for organizing this important event. Special thanks also to the Secretary General and the Office of Envoy on Technology for their messages. Today, we commemorate the International Day of Older Persons, and this year's theme could not be any more pertinent: digital equity for all ages. Digital technologies play a central role in almost every facet of our lives, but the context of the pandemic has brought to light specific opportunities and challenges for older persons. Digital inclusion is a must for all ages, and it is a priority for Mexico. That's why we co-lead with Canada and UN Women, the working group that follows up on the recommendations on this issue of the Secretary General's roadmap for digital cooperation. We drafted the resolution on rapid technological change and the Sustainable Development Goals, which included public policy recommendations to address the digital inclusion of older persons. There are many benefits for older populations associated with the access and use of digital technologies. For many, these technologies facilitate communications with relatives and social networks. It can reduce isolation and promote a higher level of independence and autonomy and foster intergenerational relations. Digital access becomes, therefore, an enabler of mental health. In addition, digital technologies allow access to information and offer a wide variety of educational options online. It can also facilitate the lives of older persons when services like banking, governmental procedures, and even healthcare are offered online. As co-chair of the Group of Friends of Digital Technologies and a member of the Group of Friends of Older Persons, Mexico is aware of all the circumstances facing older persons every day. Older persons must enjoy all their human rights and be able to actively participate in the economic, social, cultural, and political life of our times. Access to this technology is part of a healthy agent that we must provide to our populations, and that's why Mexico is an advocate of digital inclusion. Thank you.
We thank the Permanent Mission of Mexico and the ambassador for his video statement. And we look forward to working with Canada and with Mexico on this very important topic of digital and older persons. Now we come to the interactive panel discussion, and I would like to introduce Rajesh Mirchandani, who will be our moderator. Rajesh is the Chief of Communications for UN Foundation. We are so delighted to have you, Rajesh. moderate this session for us. So over to you. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Erica. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Excellencies and distinguished speakers, and everyone for joining us. I'm Rajesh Merchandani. I'm the Chief Communications Officer for the UN Foundation. It's so great to see the Secretary General acknowledge the importance of this work and to include it in his recent landmark, Our Common Agenda report, which the UN Foundation was very proud to have been able to support as well. I personally came to appreciate this generational digital divide as an issue some years ago when I was working as a journalist at the BBC. I was lucky enough to be able to produce and make and host a radio series on digital technology. And one episode was about older people. And for that episode, we interviewed my own parents. And the difference between them was amazing. My father was an early adopter. He loved being on his computer, sending emails, exploring the internet. He loved being on his iPad, reading the news, and he loved using his phone to text people. My mother was terrified. She was terrified that if she touched a button wrongly, she would break the whole thing and she wouldn't know what to do. Now, before lockdown, before the pandemic lockdown, we were able to persuade her and encourage her and help her learn how to use her smartphone so that she could text people. And during the pandemic lockdown, it's been invaluable because she's been able to keep in touch with her children and her grandchildren because she's on her own now. And that was so hugely important and vital for all of us as a lifeline, and able to see pictures of new family members as well as they were born. So she now understands the importance of being part of the digital world, but she's still terrified to go any further. And I'm sure that this resonates with many, many people here today. So I'm really pleased to be able to host this discussion about innovation, access, and design to improve digital equity and digital access for older people. Why is it important? What are the challenges? What is being done? And who else needs to pay attention to this? For this conversation, I'm delighted to welcome two expert guests. Let's meet them straight away. First of all, let's say hello to Alison Bryant, who's the Senior Vice President of Research and Enterprise and the lead for technology and digital equity at AARP. And then also Majd Alwan, who's the Senior Vice President of Technology and Business Strategy and the Executive Director for the Center for Aging Services Technologies at the organization Leading Age. Alison and Majd, it's great to have this conversation with you. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to start by asking each of you to say a little bit about why this issue is important to your organizations, and also just remind people, let us know, why is your organization well suited to be working on it? Now, just don't be afraid to jump in and speak. Don't wait to be asked. We want this to be a conversation. And audience, please submit your questions through the Q&A button. We will weave them into the conversation. And remember, speakers, we have live interpretation, so please try and speak slowly and clearly. But Alison, why don't we start with you, and then Majd, just please jump in. Tell us a little bit about your organization's work in this space.
Yes, thank you, Rajesh. So digital equity is a strategic priority for AARP. For those who are not familiar with us, we are the largest consumer organization that's focused on older persons, and we have 38 million members in the US. But our work really is for all older adults, to empower them to live as they want, as they age. So it's a really critical piece for us. And we approach it in three ways, and I'm sure we'll talk about this as we continue our conversation. The first is around advocacy and policy for older adults, and in particular around things like, in this space, digital infrastructure and access. So we've been really active in the US around issues of, for example, the emergency broadband benefits. So that's a critical piece for us. We also do a lot of work on the consumer side in information and education. We have an extensive amount of media, magazines, and digital content for consumers, but also programs. And Really importantly and exciting for us, earlier this year, we affiliated with the Older Adults Technology Service, which is an organization that is dedicated to empowering older adults through digital technology and providing digital literacy programming. So that has been a great space for us to really amplify our work. And then finally, we also look at industry partnerships and thought leadership. And so making sure that in the ways that we develop products and services in partnership with companies, or that we're really taking data out to the marketplace, that we're doing that. And so although we've been doing digital education or talking about digital equity and inclusion for a long time, I think, like many people, the experience of older persons globally throughout the COVID-19 pandemic has really only strengthened our resolve to address and help solve these issues.
For those of you who are not familiar, also Leading Age is a not-for-profit organization that serves over 5,000 aging service providers in over 43 states. And these providers serve over 4 million older adults and their caregivers on a daily basis. Our vision is an America that is free from ageism, and by extension, of course, a world that is free from ageism. And we have a strong commitment to inclusion, diversity, and equity, including digital equity. And we have sort of recognized early on, over 20 years ago, that technology is going to be a key change factor in how we deliver services to older adults and in engaging older adults. So that's why we created the Center for Aging Services Technologies, whose mission was to encourage innovation in technology and accelerate the development, validation, evaluation, and ultimately the adoption of appropriate technologies that could improve the quality of life, quality of care, for older adults, and potentially reduce the societal burdens on care providers and society in general. We also work in education, as well as have a strong advocacy like AARP on issues like health IT, like the infrastructure for internet that is available, affordable, and adequate, right? These are the three factors that we consider. And finally, also telehealth, which was sort of, in my opinion, a key element in our success of delivering healthcare during the past year here in the US and all over the world.
Okay, Majd, Alison, it's clear that I'm speaking with a couple of real experts in this space, which is great. Talk to me a little bit about, when you are developing tools to spread digital inclusion to older people, what are the things that what's the starting point? What are the things that you need to take into consideration? Majd, I think you mentioned sort of three just now: affordability, accessibility, and adequacy, whether it's adequate. I think that was the third thing. Expand on those, both of you, please, if you could just give us an idea of where do you start?
I can jump in. In addition to those three, I firmly believe that we need to include the older adults themselves, as well as their caregivers and care providers, and maybe even payers, right, in the process of innovation, in the process of design, whether we're designing a technology or we're designing a service delivery modality or a payment model, right? I firmly believe in what I refer to as collaborative user-centered design. But again, when we talk about, for example, communications technology, communications is a two-way street, and we should take into account the characteristics and the needs and wants, not just the needs, of the older person who's on one end, as well as the needs and wants of the other parties, like the family caregiver, for example, the professional caregiver, the care provider, the payer, As was mentioned, technology could be an enabler of supportive services to address social determinants of health or delivery of actual healthcare services, which means that there is an economic implication, right? There is potential cost savings in, for example, reducing unnecessary hospitalizations or hospital readmissions, and cost reductions to the payer. So we need to ensure that the payers are, so that we can design payment models that equitable payment models that subsidize or support the technology for those who are unable to afford it, and at the same time compensate the professional caregivers that are delivering services that are actually leading to those cost savings. So that's the aspect.
Great, Alison, I want to bring you in here, but I imagine I'm going to come back to you on this point because I want to talk about, there's an economic model you're describing here, but which may not be applicable in many parts of the world because this is an issue that's global. But Alison, why don't you come in on this point as well about where do you start?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I certainly echo a lot of the great ideas that Maj mentioned. For us, we've developed a framework that's sort of talking about the consumer-centered design approach that really addresses the 5 key barriers that we're seeing with older adults. And you can see how this is also relevant sort of no matter the context, no matter the country you're thinking about. These are the things that you really need to think about to address digital inclusion holistically. And those are awareness and interest. So how are older adults finding out about technology and understanding where they may be beneficial for them, things like voice recognition, right? Or AI could be a great example of that. Access and cost, and that's both to the infrastructure, so high-speed, low-cost internet being, of course, the most important, but also to the technologies themselves, whether it's smartphones or, again, voice recognition assistants. How do they actually get access to those at a cost that is doable for them? And then we look at knowledge and adoption, and that includes things like how do they actually get these devices installed? That's a huge barrier. It's great to give somebody a device, but unless they can actually get it installed and use it, that's going to be a problem. And then echoing again what Maj said about design and user experience. So making sure that older adults are part of the design process, which, having spent my career in technology, I can tell you is not always the case. Typically similar to other kinds of media, we see it sort of stopping at around age 50 and not having them part of that process. So that is critical. And then the final thing is really addressing the concerns of trust and privacy. And older adults have more concerns in that area. Now, I should say everyone probably should have concerns in that area, but we know that they're of particular interest to older adults. And so we need to be addressing them as we think about inclusion.
Great. There's some really good questions coming in, actually. So I'm going to weave some of these into the conversation. Panelists, I want to get onto the areas of how your organizations are innovating, and also this issue of overcoming resistance to adoption. But a couple of the questions that have come in already have focused on economics. So let's take a couple of these now. One from Margaret. Actually, let's start with this one, and then we'll do both at the same time. Tenku has said, in developing countries, we believe technology will be an enabler for older people. However, our resources are limited and IT infrastructure is not really in place. How should government prioritize in the space of developing the system? Connected to that, Margaret has also asked, how do you motivate private and public companies to invest in closing the technology gap to improve older persons' well-being? So I'd love to get a response from both of you on these questions.
Yeah, let me dive in here, because I think, first of all, those are fantastic questions. And from our perspective, digital inclusion, first of all, it needs to be a priority, right? So if we're thinking about lack of resources or limited resources, I think the prioritization of this is critical. And for us, to put it succinctly, digital inclusion of older persons is critical for society, and it is good business, right? So it really hits both of those things. And you can look at it from the data, right? So we know, for example, by 2050, that people 60 plus are going to be a fifth of the population, right? This is a really critical mass of people that need to be addressed. And in fact, in OECD countries right now, they're already, people over 65 are already a fifth of the population. So we already have some, super aging countries out there. And they have a tremendous impact. Now, again, I'm going to talk about US data here, but we're seeing this in other countries as well. So the power of the 50 plus, and from an economic standpoint in the US right now, is already the equivalent of the third largest country when it comes to GDP. And by 2035, it's going to be half. They're a huge piece of the innovation ecosystem. And then, and this is not just, and this is really globally, if you start to take in issues of unpaid labor, right, volunteerism, caregiving, which Maj has already been talking about, the economic value of older adults is absolutely critical to solve. But the flip of this is, right, that less than half of older adults around the world are digitally connected, right? And a lot of the growth that we're seeing in older adults is in countries that have sort of our lower or medium resource countries. So this is the opportunity, right? This is the place, this is the intersection that we have to address, and we need to address it through prioritizing resources in this particular space and making that market case to private industry for addressing this group, not secondarily, not in tertiary, which is often the case, but as a primary group to include. Again, we're not necessarily saying just go develop things for them exclusively, right? But make sure they're included in the broader development, because that's really your scalable market.
Nudged?
I totally agree. I think we should start with the infrastructure, the country's infrastructure, the local sort of counties' infrastructures. Recognizing that having that infrastructure in place is going to fuel the economic development engine, not just for older adults, but for the whole of society. That's number one. Number two, I think we need to, as I mentioned earlier, and as Alison alluded to, we need to recognize and raise awareness to the potential return on investment in terms of potential cost savings on healthcare delivery, not only for older adults, but also for pregnant women, for example, or child pediatrics care in rural areas, right? The potential impact on not just the cost savings immediately, but the long-term improvement in health indicators and the health outcomes and public health, right? And we need collaboration, right? This is not, the digital infrastructure should not be just an investment of the Department of Communications, for example. It should be Department of Communications, Commerce, Health, social services, you name it, because it is an actual infrastructure, just like roads and railroads and anything else that we have, right? So I think this is going to be key for any country, frankly, not just developing countries, but more important for developing countries. But it's equally, as again was mentioned or alluded to, we have a similar problem in first world countries, in rural areas, in frontier areas, right? We need to make that investment because it's an investment in our future.
So who are the stakeholders, and who do you want to see at the table here? And who needs to, who needs to be called out on this? Who do we need to hold accountable more?
Definitely sort of government is an important stakeholder. Telecom companies and operators of telecom companies is an important stakeholder. The departments that I already mentioned are important stakeholders. but also consumers are stakeholders, education institutions are stakeholders. We need to make sure that we have we are educating. There are programs available for older adults to teach them and close that digital gap and improve the digital literacy. We also, care services, the older aging services providers are an important stakeholder because they are an aggregating channel. And this is why, again, our work complements what AARP does on the consumer side. And I believe we need to raise their awareness of availability of digital solutions. And this is exactly why we are developing tools to help providers better understand, plan for, select, and implement these solutions. And they are considered, they as well as other stakeholders like clinicians, are considered trusted referral channels that could recommend the appropriate technology solutions for older adults and their caregivers.
So I'd love to hear a little bit more about how your organizations are both actually innovating. How are you innovating? How are you looking at innovation? It's not just about technology and gadgets, right? It's also about use, practice, policies. And then in particular, there was a question here from Nancy, who's keen to understand, what's being done to include older persons with vision loss and their caregivers, to connect to the internet and have accessible technology as well. That's a very specific question. But Alison, maybe why don't you start there?
Sure, absolutely. And this will sort of build also, I think, on your last question as well. I think there's two things I want to highlight here. First, we do see this as an ecosystem issue, right? So a lot of the innovation has to come not just in these silos, but really across those. I think that's critical. So one of those is this idea of inclusive design, which I mentioned earlier, and I think brings up the vision issue that was just mentioned, right? One of the great things about inclusive design, or this idea of designing at the edges of the data, right, is that when you do that, you typically are actually creating things that work for everybody. And I think vision loss is a great example of this. We've seen some interesting idea or innovations and things like closed caption. So there's companies that have developed closed caption specifically for people with hearing loss. Well, those got integrated into platforms like Zoom, and it's better for everybody, right? Now we all get really great closed caption and transcription. That's a really good example. So inclusive design is critical, and that's a place where AARP is working on developing inclusive design resources for the industry. That's one of the things we've heard from industry, is help us to do a better job there. So that's one area of innovation. I think the other, and this is one that isn't necessarily thought about or brought up in a lot of these forums, but a lot of the issues around technology and infrastructure is really an ageism issue. And the intersection of ageism with technology and perceptions that people have of older adults and technology, and that's huge. And so we've actually been doing research in this area, looking at media imagery. First of all, just in general of older adults in the media and how they're being represented, but specifically around how older adults are being shown with technology. So first, only 5% of brand images that show older adults even include technology. You can imagine that's very different from how the general population is being shown with technology. And most of those images are actually showing older adults being helpless or being helped by somebody else. Think about the consumer, right? That is something that if you're constantly being shown as a Luddite, right, or not being empowered by technology, it begins to have an impact. And it certainly has an impact then on what people who are policymakers or who are designing technology, how they are viewing older adults. So that's, my call to the media industry to address that. And in fact, that's something we've been doing in a partnership that we have with Getty Images. So how do we address this even in stock imagery? You imagine stock imagery shows up everywhere. So we created a new collection called the Disrupt Aging Collection, and good, positive, representations of older adult and technology exist in that collection so that people can use them and show great, empowered, images of older adults and technology to change that frame that we're all coming to this conversation with.
That's a fascinating point, and it really kind of shows us the importance of media and imagery and stereotyping. I think that probably also reinforces something that exists anyway, that I talked about in the introduction, and that is fear and hesitancy from older people to use technology. This is actually a question from Francesca on this point as well. So panelists, how are you trying to overcome that resistance to adoption or fear of change, for example, or just diving right in? Maj, why don't you start there?
Well, I think we initially technology developers and frankly even caregiving and caregivers and caregiving and care services organizations have focused primarily on need, frankly. And that may have sort of had the perception that the technology that is being developed as an assistive device could be stigmatizing, right? As opposed to starting to focus on wants and the need for, we're all social animals, right? We all need social connectedness and social engagement. So it's in how we try to push technology, shove technology down people's throat, as opposed to start by the pull for engaging and social connectedness, right? That's number one. Number two, by designing technologies to be sort of very intuitive. Alison mentioned the voice controlled devices, which are getting a lot of enjoyed a lot of adoption and embracement from the older adult population because they're intuitive, right? So that's the second factor. The third factor is especially designing, for example, for tablets, making the user interface very simple and not unbreakable, right? So locking the operating system, and no matter what the older adult, even if they're not digitally literate, they cannot break it, so to speak, right? And the fourth is, of course, training and ensuring that there is appropriate training as well as technical support and technical advice and services, not just by the vendor, but by a group of peers. The last element that I want to mention is value, right? What is this technology doing for me, right? So the value proposition of whether it's the service or the added value that it's bringing to me, the convenience, the connectivity, and so on and so forth.
You know, there's another thing as well, and this is just someone's mentioning this in chat that I just thought would be interesting. And this is something else that reminds me of my mother's experience with technology. It's the way that companies are always phoning up and saying, hey, I've got this great new deal for you. Changing the rules, changing the service. That is baffling to anyone, but it's also terrifying to older people. How do you address that? Is there a regulatory element there? Is there a legislative element there? Who wants to dive in on that one?
There's probably a whole lot there, right? Well, I mean, I think I don't know if that I'd go all the way to regulatory. I mean, I do think, though, when you start with the consumer and you actually think about them first, not what you want as a business, and sort of try to shove it down their throats, that certainly does help. But I do think the element of education is really important. And again, this is actually across all ages, but we certainly see that need, even more with older adults, where what's interesting is that they are a little bit further behind typically on adopting new technologies from an adoption curve perspective. But, and we know this from, we do trending research on technology, every year we're doing a study on this. And what we've seen is that, but once they have it in their hands, they tend to be some of the heaviest users of these technologies if they see them as being additive to their life. So how do we address them in ways, and this goes a little bit to what Maj was saying about value, and really think about that as we're putting out new technologies or new services. And I don't think that's necessarily what's happening right now.
Yeah, and just on that point, now that my mother has started to learn how to use her smartphone, she's never off it, which is actually great. But your point, Alison, I think is is almost the summation here. And we only have 1 minute left, so I'll get you each to give me 30 seconds on this. We need to start seeing older people as also an equal part of the market and also consumers, just as younger people are. It's their right and opportunity for them to be included. And that's how you create systems and contracts and services that will actually speak to them. They're consumers too. 30 seconds each on that last point.
Yeah, no, I think you did a great job of summing up. And I would say we can't wait for the next global pandemic to solve this, right? I mean, we have been thrown into this, but these are things that we've known needed to be solved for the past 10, 15 years. So how do we get ahead of this and really address this for everyone, but really keep older adults at the center of some of these solutions?
And Majd?
I agree. I think we've been seeing that the older adult population is one of the fastest segments in terms of going on the internet and adopting smartphones and tablets from the statistics. And I firmly believe that the pandemic has accelerated this. We're probably going to see that next year and moving on. Not only accelerated this as a step increase in terms of percentages, but also in the rate of acceleration. That's number two. Number three, I firmly believe that we need to take advantage of this opportunity and also focus on the economic value that older adults can bring as volunteers, as, for example, tutors who can deliver tutoring to virtual students who have been deprived of in-person tutoring or in-person education, and contribute their experience and knowledge and sage, as opposed to just focus on their needs and the perceived burden that they have on society.
Okay. Majd and Alison, thank you so much for your expertise and your thoughts and ideas and sharing some of that with us today. Thank you also, audience. Very, very lively chat going on. Lots of questions posed. We were able to put some of those questions to our panelists, not all of them, of course. We didn't quite have time for that. It shows that there is such an interesting and engaged discussion on this point today of all days. So thank you, panelists, and thank you, audience. And with that, I will hand back to Magda. Back to you.
Thank you, Rajesh, Alison, Majd. This is indeed a stimulating and informative discussion, and I am delighted to see that our audience are also feeling this stimulating discussion. We now turn our attention to the second interactive conversation in our program, moderated by Ursula Windhoven, International Telecommunications Union representative to the United Nations. Ursula, over to you.
Thank you so much, Magda. Excellencies, dear all, it's an honor to be your moderator for this next segment on working towards digital equity for all ages, the SDGs and digital technologies. At ITU, we're committed to connecting all the world's people, regardless of their means or location. So digital equity is at the heart of what we do. Before turning to our impressive panel to continue this fantastic discussion that we've just been hearing, we're going to start with a brief video and presentation on some important resources in this area, a publication and an online training. And it's my pleasure to turn to my colleague at the ITU, Roxana Widmer-Eliescu, Senior Coordinator for Digital Inclusion. Roxana, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Ursula. Good morning, everyone, and thank you all. It's a big privilege to be part of this important event. And I think most of the messages that I wanted to deliver have been already addressed in the previous panel, so it will be quite challenging for me. But since a picture is worth 1,000 words, I hope a video is even more impactful and inspirational. So in the interest of time, I would like to begin my presentation with this video, please.
The world is digital and its population is aging. For the first time in human evolution, people aged over 60 have outnumbered children under 5 years old, and are predicted to reach 2 billion by 2050. Older persons have always been an asset to their families, communities and societies. Nevertheless, they're being perceived as a vulnerable group, dependent on younger generations. The digital world can, no doubt, enable older persons to participate and contribute to society, turning this misconception of vulnerable into valuable. In an interconnected world, information and communication technologies, or ICTs, can empower and contribute to healthy, independent and fulfilled lives of present and future older adults. ICTs, if provided in accessible and user-friendly formats and platforms, can be valuable enablers for older adults, helping them to overcome more easily age-related limitations, including hearing, dexterity and visual impairment. For example, accessible smart televisions, allowing users with hearing aids to enjoy all types of entertainment content with their families. Use of virtual assistant technology to obtain all types of information and access online services. Use of zooming features to increase the font size to facilitate reading. The digital context reduces distances and avoids isolation and loneliness. It also facilitates active participation in all aspects of today's society. Therefore, by building accessible and inclusive digital environments, all users can adapt technology to their specific abilities and needs. For instance, they can buy products more easily, using the e-commerce process, manage their finances and payments through e-banking, continue lifelong learning thanks to opportunities offered by e-learning platforms, contribute to society, including sharing their experiences and enhancing constructive dialogue between generations. Moreover, in 2020, the Global Coalition on Aging estimated the global market value of older adults, the so-called silver economy, at $17 trillion and growing. There is a huge business opportunity for this untapped market. To help member states create accessible and age-friendly ICT environments, the International Telecommunications Union, ITU, has developed the report Aging in a Digital World from Vulnerable to Valuable. The report not only raises awareness of the trends and good practices, but also provides concrete guidelines to ensure healthy, happy and valuable aging, and empower older persons as active participants in their digital communities and societies. For more information on ITUD digital inclusion work and resources, please visit www.itu.int.
Thank you very much. So I hope this video set nicely the scene for the IT presentation in Digital Equity for All Ages event, a wonderful title in celebration of the International Day of Older Person in 2021. So to continue, I will ask colleagues to further run the slides, please. So it is recognized that there are two global mega trends that influence each other: an aging population and the exponential increase in digital technology, both of which are predicted to generate important socio-economic changes worldwide. So we know that access and use of internet is yet challenging for almost half of the world population. And we also know that in the next 3 decades, over 2 billion people are expected to be over age of 60. And as already mentioned by the previous speaker, in some region like Europe, Northern America, and Asia, 1 in 4 person is predicted to be age 65 or over. So in this context, to ensure a healthy aging, it is key to address holistically the digital inclusion of all people, regardless of age, gender, or ability, and to build digitally inclusive and age-friendly environments all over the world. Next slide, please. So therefore, In addition to raising awareness that we all do with such much passion in this topic, we also work to further develop guidelines on policies and strategy recommendation, to share also best practice, and to put at member states and stakeholders' disposal some relevant tools and solutions to support them in this process, to turn these mega trends challenges into opportunities and a win-win for all. Next slide, please. So as indicated in the video, ITU first resource in this topic is this Aging in the Digital World from Vulnerable to Valuable report, which provides an overall understanding of the challenges that older persons are facing in the digital ecosystem, while also presents good practices and solutions and guidelines also on how to develop and use technology to reduce age-related vulnerability and to leverage the contribution of older generation to our society. So I just want to say that now the report is freely available in all UN languages, and it's in our website, and I invite you all to use it. Next slide, please. So now, in complement of the report, I have the pleasure to launch, in celebration of this day, our first online self-paced training, ICT for Better Aging and Livelihood in the Digital Landscape. So from today, the training is freely available in English and Spanish, and French will be available in the next week, so stay tuned. I would like to say that this training is also localized to best respond to the environment and best practices of each of the speaking countries, and is developed in digital accessible format, so can be used by everyone, including persons with disabilities. And through these 3 modules, this course includes holistic information on a range of key topics such as challenges and opportunities arising from these 2 megatrends that we mentioned, but also presents key elements to be considered in the process of digital inclusion of older persons, including, for instance, affordability, accessibility of ICT, and the capacity building and appropriation of technology by older person, and also mention about the role of intergenerational support. We also explain the accessibility requirements and standards involved in developing inclusive and accessible ICT and digital environments, and finally, provide policy and strategy recommendation. So, upon completion of this course, member states, policymakers, decision makers, and stakeholders will be empowered with fundamental guidelines, as well as the tools, resources to establish key pillars at local, national, and regional levels towards achieving a healthier and inclusive digital society. Next slide, please. So to conclude, I put here some outcomes of our training, but also some food for thought. So for me, one of the main issues is that getting old is a privilege, and getting old in a digital world is a chance. And this global context is also an opportunity from business perspective, from the socioeconomic sector. So the silver economy, we know that is considered to have a market value about 17 trillion. And additionally, OECD has estimated that building multi-generational workforce and giving older employees greater opportunities to work could raise gross domestic product per capita by 19% over the next 3 decades. So therefore, policy and business makers have huge incentives to ensure that appropriate laws, policies, strategies are in place to ensure that our society and environments are to be accessible, inclusive, and age-friendly for all of us. So finally, I would like to highlight that this is an issue that matters for all of us, and therefore partnership and collaboration at all levels is crucial to jointly achieve the goal of better aging and livelihood in the digital landscape. I thank you for your attention, and in this last slide, please, I invite you all to visit our website and to use our resources to jointly achieve this goal. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Roxana, for sharing with us these exciting new resources. And I believe you also posted the links in the chat. so people can follow up with them. Thank you so much.
Not yet. It was for digital accessibility, but now I will do it for these resources.
Very good. Thank you for that. So now we're thrilled to introduce our fantastic panel. We have, first of all, have Professor Rajendra Pratap Gupta, who's the chair, Dynamic Coalition on Internet and Jobs for the UN Internet Governance Forum. And he's also the chairman drafting committee for Digital Health Standards NABH in India. And we have Dr. Claudia Mela, who's the UN independent expert on the enjoyment of all human rights by older persons. And just a reminder, dear audience, to please put your questions in the Q&A function so we can weave them into the discussion. So Rajendra, let's start with you. In your view, why is digital equity for all ages important? And what are the top challenges as you see them to achieving digital equity for older persons? And in your answer, and I feel this is part of what's important about this particular session, is if you could reflect on how these are different in the developing and developed world.
Thank you, Ursula. Dignitaries, excellencies, and thanks for focusing this important issue of digital equity. I thank UN and AARP, especially Erica, for inviting me and hearing my views. You know, what I heard is very important. It sets the tone. We are talking of two mega trends. One is longevity, one is digitalization. And the other statement that we saw was from vulnerable to valuable. So if there are two mega trends and they are on the growth, what they should do is converge. So for us, one of the key messages that digitalization and older adults, this population has to work in tandem. And the second important point is that what digitalization is in 21st century, literacy was in 20th century. You cannot have social security without digital security. That's very, very clear. And when we say how is digital equity important for all ages, let's be very clear. We are here today for whom we call older adults. We owe them. And they are integral part of who we are. We have enthusiasm, they have experience. Both go hand in hand. Now the issue of how it is important, especially for older adults. For them, it's a matter of quality of life. It's a matter of productivity. We just heard silver economy would grow by 19%. The GDP would grow 19% if we were able to equip them. Now that sets you a very realistic number of what this means for us. For older persons, digital equity is about economic safety. It's about emotional, social, and physical well-being. That is very, very important. If we don't address this, the void will increase. And when the gap increases, we know what's going to happen. When in 2050, 22% of our population would be older adults, that sets us that, our demographic opportunity, what we call as many times demographic dividend, would be kind of getting towards inverting. That means we will have more people to spend and less people to produce. So for us, that's a huge, huge opportunity. And then automation will have its own take on what we do today. It's going to change. So that's where the digital upskilling of older adults is important. Within the UN IGF, I run a study every year. It's called the Jobs 2020. Then this year is Jobs 2021, Internet and Jobs. We're looking at how do we use Internet for upskilling. And we find two groups that are always left behind. One is women, the other is senior citizens, which is older adults. So I think this is very important. On the developing world versus developed world, it's very easy to understand that developed world has the resources. They have social security, they have health, and they can deliver, they can take care of their people. But for the developing world, which will have 80%, which is LMIC would have 80% of older adults, by 2050, and they will not have the resources commensurate to take care of their needs, which means the inequities will grow. The way to look at it is, can we provide digital equity in terms of enabling them to use the resources that are available to take care of this? So I think it's a twin challenge, and we can only fulfill it by equipping them with digital skills. That is what I see as a great opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. Just as a follow-up, Rajendra, do you see technology also playing a role in helping to provide some of these solutions itself, whether it's digital literacy or other aspects?
So just as said, that I don't see a technology or digitalization providing solutions, but that's a quality of life issue now. You cannot live in today's age. We are talking thousands of miles away, connected with technology. I think my earlier speakers have brought this fact out that today everyone is using technology. It's about the way we live. So I believe that if they need to live a fuller life, technology has to be an integral part of their living. Yes, it does provide solutions. I'll give you an example. In India, we put so-called senior citizen, older adults into the Ministry of Social Justice. That sets our importance for this particular segment. And this is, today we are launching a website for providing jobs to older adults. So very focused, because January this year, we had the longitudinal aging study of India, which said 50% of older adults or seniors are active. If they are active, we need to productively, give them an opportunity to leverage the best. So I think, yes, I see technology from all aspects, right from education, right from health, right from daily living. It's an integral part to what they do. So I would not say just one or two aspects. It's the 360-degree utilization of technology for older adults. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Rajendra. Claudia, let's bring you in. We've heard from Rajendra that tech can and is critical for older persons, but digital tools and virtual avenues are not always something that is positive for older persons. There are some downsides and barriers and negative impacts. So what do you see from a human rights perspective that's really important for us all to bear in mind? And who in particular is most at risk of being left behind?
Thank you, Ursula, also for the warm welcome. And let me also reiterate that I'm very happy to be here today. And good morning to everybody, good afternoon, and good night to some which are attending this. And thank you to the organizers and this joint event. I'm really happy to be here. And coming back to your question, I think we already heard a couple of things today, how digital tools give older persons an insecure feeling. So it's not only that they are sometimes have the feeling that they break something, but they are also sometimes feeling that their questions are foolish in a way. And that's not true. That's not true. And that is something we are really missing. It is not only a question of needs, but it's also a question of choices. Sometimes older persons don't have any choices because nobody is really approaching them, taking them into account. So from a human rights perspective, what we also heard already is the participation of older person is key. They are the experts. They know exactly what they want, what they need, and how it should look like. It's not only about universal design, but it's also about support and the inclusion to get a wide range of enjoying their human rights. We already heard that it might be an avenue to get social security, to get healthcare, but also to participate and be socially included. But what is it if an older person does not want to take this avenue and not want to be digital included in this way because they have more fears than they see it as a value, as an added asset? So is there also an aspect how they can have their choices? Or are we just saying, it is part of our world and that's it, how it is? I fully agree that ageism and age discrimination might be one of the biggest barriers which hinder older persons on their full enjoyment of their human rights and also hinder them to take the opportunity to be included in the digital world. We already heard how the media is sometimes portraying them, but it's also that they sometimes do have the ageism in themselves. So they are not feeling that they are up to these new technologies and not trusting them and themselves as well. So from my perspective, it is also something that we need to make sure that this is a right for them. It is a right of digital inclusion. It is their right to get the information. It is their right to access healthcare. And especially for middle income countries, we already heard that infrastructure is a big issue. But I also want to assure you that it's also a big issue, which was already said, for rural areas in the industrial countries, because this is where many of the older persons are living. And there they are left behind with the infrastructure to get their devices and to have access to the internet and to get the support they would need. Because sometimes, as we all know, it's just a very small thing how to get into these digital avenues and to find the right solution. And if nobody's there, so who should you approach? If there would be peer groups, that would be wonderful. But as we all know, there are not always some groups available. And you also asked me what I think are the most vulnerable groups. And what I came across is that ageism aggravates all the other inequalities. So especially older persons living in poverty, or older persons in need of care, living in rural areas, we already mentioned, they are the most one who are left behind because they don't have access to the specific needs and to the specific tools and to the specific support which would be needed to bring them, as I said, into the digital world. I'll stop here. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Claudia. And we had a comment from Liberia, which I think is really important in terms of these vulnerable groups, which is older persons who may be illiterate as well may face some additional challenges. Rajendra, we heard earlier today in the session a little bit about the impact of COVID, and I wondered if you could just share with us from your side and what you've seen, what impact has had on COVID has had on older persons' relationship with the digital world. Is there anything further you want to add to what was said earlier?
Yes, so there are two aspects to it. One is that almost the studies that are there, that between 70 to 80% of older adults or senior citizens were impacted by COVID in one way or the other because they were susceptible, they couldn't go out, they were more confined to their homes. So they actually became a victim of loneliness and depression on one side. But those who moved to technology, I had seen in my home, where my mother-in-law and others, they actually moved to technology. As my earlier speaker said, that we had no choice. Yes, so I have seen them now more glued to gadgets than ever before. But yes, the digital literacy in a country like India is just 10%. So we still cannot see India from the lens of me or you probably. It has to be seen from a complete picture. So there is a huge gap still, and that needs to be bridged. But yes, people don't have a choice. They need to move towards technology. They need to be trained. And to your point that people are illiterate, or they don't understand how to be. So digital tools allow you to train them in a much more effective manner using digital tool itself. So I see this as a huge opportunity.
Thank you so much, Rajendra. In this session, we also want to talk about solutions and policy recommendations. So I wondered if we could, in particular, look to that. And Rajendra, when it comes to achieving digital equity for older persons, partnership has come up, and we heard about that earlier as well. What kinds of partnerships do we need?
So Ursula, this is very interesting, and I'm glad that this particular program today is focused and bringing this issue. So one is that we need to institutionalize, as a policymaker who has written policies, I always believe that we should institutionalize, if there's a program, because program rests on whims and fancies. If I like a program, I will push it. Someone comes in my place, they will leave. So first cardinal principle of putting addressing this issue of older adults is to institutionalize a partnership ecosystem. And that needs a solution-centric approach. So I clearly see partnerships which will be between academia, which is research, industry, and the associations like AARP, because they actually represent a wide bouquet of senior citizens or older adults across the spectrum. So I clearly see where the partnerships are multi-sectoral and multidimensional. Otherwise, we will address the issue in parts which will not serve the purpose that we are trying to solve.
Thank you so much, Rajendra. Now, Claudia, I think as a human rights expert, you bring so much to this. Could you share with us what difference does it make, a human rights perspective, as we look at solutions for older persons and in the digital world? What's the added value of human rights that we really need to pay attention to?
Thank you. I think, first of all, we need to shift from a beneficiary approach to a human rights-based approach, which means older persons are rights holders. So they are really entitled to get access to information and to all the other rights which were already mentioned. And it's also, as I said, they need to be included in participating in decision-making, not only when we think about them as one of the key stakeholders, but also as whole aspects. There might be some issues where the politicians or the UN are not thinking about older persons, and there they still need to be included because we need to have this life course approach. And this doesn't end or start when you're 50 plus and when you're 60 plus. This is where we come also back, who is an older person or an older adult, as was said before. And from my perspective, it is a social construct, and this needs also to be taken into account. And we also need to take into account the diversity of older persons. Not every older person is vulnerable and does not know how to use the technology, but there are gaps which were already mentioned. And there are specificities, especially what we also heard from Rajendra. Older women might have a double negative impact because they never had the chance to get the same education or to get the living, the job they wanted. So in older age, the inequalities get bigger and bigger, and this might also be an obstacle to get included in the digital world. So from my perspective, the intersectionality and the diversity of older persons need to be taken into account, and we need to combat ageism and age discrimination. Therefore, I'm also very happy that we have the Decade on Healthy Aging, which brought us a new global report on ageism, which also gives advice how the policymakers and governments and key stakeholders can take older persons more into account when they are thinking about their work and how to improve the setting in the policymaking and in the lawmaking. So don't forget that older persons are rights holders, and the rights don't diminish with old age. Thank you.
That's fantastic. I think that's a really great point, a key point to end on. And Rajendra, as we wrap up this discussion, do you have a final brief message, a key takeaway that you want our audience to depart with?
So if we leave the older persons, older adults behind, we leave the development behind. We can't afford it.
Fantastic, a great point to end on. And I would just invite our wonderful panelists, if they can have a look at the Q&A as well and the chat and wish to answer any of the other wonderful questions that we've been getting. I'm sorry we didn't have a chance to address more of them. So with that, I would like to thank our wonderful speakers, Claudia, Rajendra, Roxana, and our wonderful audience, and hand it back to Erica. Thank you.
Thank you, Ursula. I hope all of you have enjoyed the substantive information you are receiving from our speakers today. I don't need to iterate the closing points made by Claudia and Rajendra, but boy, what sessions we've had. So thank you, Roxana, Ursula, Claudia, and Rajendra. And now it is my distinct honor and pleasure to welcome the First Lady of Chile, as well as Masumi Ono, the Chief of the Social Inclusion and Participation Branch at UNDESA, to deliver closing remarks for this program. Madam First Lady, your commitment to older persons by being with us live on this program speaks volumes. The floor is yours, Your Excellency.
No nos ponen. No, ok. Muy buenos días o buenas tardes a todas y a todos los presentes. Quiero agradecer la invitación a este seminario sobre un tema tan relevante como es el acceso igualitario a la tecnología y al mundo digital de las personas mayores. Es realmente un honor estar aquí representando a Chile y al gobierno de mi marido, el presidente Sebastián Piñera, y a todas las personas de mi país que con compromiso y dedicación trabajan día a día por mejorar la calidad de vida de los adultos mayores. Quiero felicitar a los expositores y a los panelistas por sus interesantes presentaciones y paneles en estos temas de innovación, diseño e inclusión de tecnologías para las personas mayores. La verdad es que me siento muy feliz de que existan instancias de alto nivel como esta para compartir tales desafíos, experiencias e intercambiar buenas prácticas y de esa manera ayudar a relevar la realidad de las personas mayores. Solo a modo de contexto les quiero contar que en Chile tenemos una esperanza de vida que llega a los 80,7 años, donde 3,5 millones de personas son mayores de 60. Esto es una convención en Chile que es mayor de 60. Esto es casi un 20% de nuestra población y se estima que para el año 2050 va a llegar a ser un 32% de la población. Este enorme cambio demográfico que estamos viviendo está generando sin lugar a dudas un profundo impacto social, económico, cultural, afectando ámbitos como el de la salud, las pensiones, el trabajo, el diseño de las ciudades, el cuidado, la vida en comunidad y por supuesto la inclusión y la inclusión digital que nos hemos referido en el día de hoy. Debido a la relevancia y necesidad de abordar este desafío en nuestro país, es que durante este periodo de gobierno hemos enfocado nuestro trabajo en impulsar políticas públicas que buscan mejorar la calidad de vida de los adultos mayores. Por esto, el año 2018 creamos el programa Adulto Mayor, Adulto Mejor, el cual trabajamos junto al Servicio Nacional del Adulto Mayor y que promueve, en primer lugar, un cambio cultural de esta etapa de la vida, derribando mitos y prejuicios que permitan comprender que son años de grandes oportunidades y también de derechos que tenemos que llegar a alcanzar para todas las personas mayores. De igual forma, hemos trabajado en fortalecer su inclusión, participación y un envejecimiento positivo y saludable. Con ese objetivo desarrollamos y realzamos un conjunto de iniciativas y acciones concretas que implementan los distintos ministerios y servicios públicos en nuestro país. Dentro de estas iniciativas quisiera destacar solo algunas, como la disminución del precio de los medicamentos, la rebaja al 50% del valor del transporte público, la rebaja en el impuesto a los bienes raíces, la creación de una defensa sociosanitaria y sociosocial para las personas y la incorporación de 180 comunas al programa de ciudades amigables de la Organización Mundial de la Salud, entre otras. Por supuesto, no puedo dejar de referirme al fuerte impacto que sabemos ha tenido la pandemia del COVID en el mundo y especialmente cómo ha afectado esto a los adultos mayores. Perdón. Al ser el grupo de mayor riesgo, la mayoría se ha visto enfrentado a largos y estrictos confinamientos, muchas veces acompañados de una soledad muy dolorosa. Y ello, lamentablemente, se ha visto profundizado debido a lo que ustedes han hablado de esta gran inequidad en el acceso al mundo digital y la consecuente brecha tecnológica existente en este grupo etario. En Chile, el año 2017, solo un 32% de los mayores de 60 utilizaba Internet. Y si bien somos conscientes de que las brecha digital que existía en las personas mayores frente al uso de la tecnología, la pandemia vino a demostrar crudamente esta realidad. Sin embargo, también nos mostró que las personas mayores sí quieren aprender y estar conectadas. De acuerdo a una encuesta realizada en Chile por el Ministerio de Transporte y Telecomunicaciones a personas entre 60 y 80 años para conocer cómo había sido su relación con Internet y las tecnologías durante la pandemia, un 40% de los encuestados reconoció que aprendió a usar teléfonos inteligentes durante la pandemia. Esto es consecuencia de haber desarrollado una estrategia de alfabetización digital a través del Ministerio de Educación, el Servicio Nacional del Adulto Mayor y el gabinete que encabezo, aumentando considerablemente durante estos 18 meses cursos y capacitaciones al respecto. Y asimismo, con el Ministerio de Transporte y Telecomunicaciones, también hemos llegado a zonas rurales que no tenían conexión y que hoy día estamos llegando a un público mayor, aunque nos falta mucho. Todo esto les permitió conectarse indudablemente en primer lugar con sus familias y seres queridos y poder acceder a muchos beneficios que entrega el Estado. Ello nos da esperanza de que la distancia se puede ir acortando con buenos programas, capacitaciones y medidas de inclusión digital, lo cual es clave para su integración social en nuestra sociedad. Para terminar, no puedo dejar de mencionar que si bien hemos ido avanzando, aún nos queda mucho camino por recorrer. Siguen siendo muchos los desafíos y cambios por implementar para lograr que las personas mayores tengan el lugar en la sociedad que les corresponda y la calidad de vida que merecen, y nuestro trabajo es clave para el éxito de esto. Quiero aprovechar de reconocer y agradecer a la Organización de las Naciones Unidas por la organización de este seminario y a todas y todos los que participan por el trabajo y la dedicación a esta maravillosa causa. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Madam First Lady, for your closing remarks. We are most grateful for your presence with us today. First Ladies have a political platform for impact, and over the years, we have seen you utilize your platform to raise the profile of older persons in Chile's national policies and around the world. So thank you very much for that. I want to thank all the speakers and moderators for bringing so many stimulating and enriching ideas to this event. There's no question about the magnitude and significance of global population aging and its implications on digital technologies. For older persons to be an integral part of the digital world and be empowered by technology, the technology world must respond to their specific needs and preferences, and together with governments, policymakers, and stakeholders, address challenges such as data protection and exploitation, privacy intrusion, technology bias, and ageism. These issues need to be taken up by all of us in moving forward towards digital equity for all ages. The International Day of Older Persons is a day for older persons by older persons. And each year, the NGO Committee on Aging in New York collaborates with its counterparts in Geneva and Vienna. Older persons are in the driving seat, engaging in UN processes and making their voices heard, generating analyses and proposing ideas, and working towards building solutions across the social groups to promote a society for all ages. On behalf of myself and our team at UNDESA, we thank the co-chairs of this year's commemoration, Erica and Magda, for organizing an excellent event. I wish to also acknowledge Cynthia, the chair of the NGO Committee on Aging in New York, for her tremendous support. We look forward to our continued work together to mobilize collective action. Thank you all very much, and this ends the program.
Madam First Lady, we thank you for taking the time to join us today and for your lifelong dedication to support of these causes. And Masumi, we wish to express our gratitude to you and your team, the Chief of the Program on Aging, Amal Abu Rafeh, as well as Claudia Beatriz Altavaz and Julia Ferre. However, we could not have possibly executed this program without the commitment, dedication, and expertise of Chateau Nfila and Amin Lamrabat, who have contributed countless hours and participated in the preparation of this program side by side with us every step of the way. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, and now we come to the end of our program, and we would like to once again thank our sponsors, AARP and M&T Bank, and our partners, UNDESA, the UN Office of the Secretary General's Envoy on Technology, the NGO Committee on Aging New York, and the Group of Friends of Older Persons. Additionally, we offer generous thanks to the teams from Interprenet who provided accessibility, accommodations through live closed captioning and ASL interpretation, as well as translation to English, Spanish, and French for all of us today. Finally, a huge thank you to my colleagues and team at the NGO Committee of Aging, especially our chair, Cynthia Stuan, the entire communications team, and Anna Stauber for her invaluable support along each step of this process. Once again, we thank our distinguished speakers and moderators, and we thank you for joining us in commemorating this event. We invite you to follow us on social media and to stay connected in sharing the actions you and your communities are facing to advance issues benefiting older persons. Goodbye. Thank you again.